Carl Bildt. Carl, perhaps you'd like to come up to the platform. Then I can introduce you, somebody who I've known and had the pleasure of knowing for a long time, into the last millennium, it is true. He's chair of the Global Commission on Internet Governance and a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Europe. He served as Sweden's foreign minister from 2006 to 2014, as well as Sweden's prime minister from 1991 to 1994. Under this capacity, he initiated and concluded Sweden's accession into the EU in 1995. Carl has particularly, of course, been noted internationally as a mediator in the Yugoslav wars, serving as the European Union's special envoy to former Yugoslavia from June 1995. I remember a budget transfer we passed through the European Parliament to give you 20 million to get you on your way. I remember that particular point, but that was a bit of time ago. And also, of course, co-chairman of the Dayton Peace Conference. Today, this is a session on the global political scene today and tomorrow. I mean, you could actually talk till tomorrow, I realize on this, but you have 20 minutes, Carl. So if you'd like to come to the podium and give us your thoughts, then we'll have a discussion.
Thanks. Honor and pleasure to be here. And James, honor and pleasure to be shared by you. Brings back memories. We've known each other for a long time. I even knew your mother, which says something. And you recollect that particular moment when, after the end of the Bosnia war, we had to set up a peace operation. I was given that particular task, and that was it. And managed to get some money out of Brussels. And it was one of the difficult decisions I've taken in my life. We managed to get some sort of documents out of the Commission. We went to a branch of the Deutsche Bank in the suburbs of Brussels and got 500,000 cash Deutschmarks in brown envelopes. And then we had a private plane waiting for us at Brussels airport. And we went out and went into the plane, and the pilot asked, "Where are we heading?" So there was a discussion with different alternatives like Bermuda, Cayman Islands, and whatever. We ended up in Sarajevo and spent the money, hopefully, wisely. Thanks for that. Looking forward, 2030, new geopolitical order. Well, looking backwards, it's 13 years to then. Looking backwards 13 years, well, we are back 2003, 2004. That was the good days, when if you read the European security strategy of those days, I can't remember exactly the phrase, but essentially said, we've never had it so good in Europe. And it was essentially true. And if you look at what is behind us, it's not bad. I was born some time ago in a world that was 2.5 billion people. And when James and I were in student politics in those days, the expectation, the conventional wisdom, was that the population boom was going to bring poverty, despair, and probably revolution and breakdown to the entire world. That is not what happened. We are today 7.5 billion people. And the most amazing thing is not the increasing number, but the rapid decrease in the number of people that are poor. Go back in time. 90% of the population of the world was desperately poor. Today, according to UN statistics, only in the last quarter of a century, the share of people in the developing world that are desperately poor have gone from 44, 45%, if I don't remember it, to down to less than 10%. And on the continuation of present trends, will virtually disappear by 2030. It is amazing what has been achieved. And add to that different other indicators, child mortality, age that people live, whatever. I normally argue that the last quarter of a century has been the best quarter of a century for mankind ever, ever, in terms of these particular indicators. And then you ask yourself, how come and why? Well, a couple of different factors. One is obviously science and technology, but that is not enough. I think it has been the success of what we normally refer to as the liberal global order. And what is the liberal global order? Well, it's a set of rules, an element of predictability. If that is in the individual transaction between firms, WTO, or whether it is the United Nations with an element of security that is provided by that, or whether it is the different alliance systems that are there since 1945, it all adds up to a framework of stability and predictability that allowed globalization to accelerate and produce all of these rather fantastic results, if you look at it in the longer time perspective. And it all goes back, you might argue, to the Atlantic Charter. And that's interesting to note. Atlantic Charter during the final phase of the Second World War was the Anglo-Saxon word trying to set the stage for what was going to happen. That was Roosevelt and that was Churchill. And what they set out to do there after the defeat of Hitler was really what created the liberal global order. And I say that also in view of the fact that these two powers, Britain and the United States, that created the liberal global order, are now slightly uncertain, to put it in diplomatic terms, or whether they're still abiding by it. So very good times. But then obviously things are changing. I think we're all aware of that. It's become messy. A new geopolitical order, or however we would like to phrase it, but a more messy time. And I would like to talk about, or mention, or I normally do, in terms of three developments or trends, or however you might prefer to call it. The first is obviously that geopolitics is starting to challenge globalization. The shift in power balances, the geopolitical rivalries are starting not to unravel completely, but to threaten on the fringes of the liberal global order. It's not that Davos ceases to exist, but it's not that Davos is such a dominant issue in the affairs of the globe as it used to. The global economy has come back from the near-death experience of 2008 and early 2009, but it's not globalization with the force that it had previously. Previously, we had the global economy 2, 3, 4% a year. We had global trade double that figure. And we had global financial flows double the figure of trade. Now, growth is back, not quite, but nearly, not bad. Trade is not back. And financial flows is distinctly not back. So globalization, yes, but weaker. Geopolitical rivalries, much stronger. It is more sort of Donetsk than Davos that is shaping the world at the moment. That's the first trend. The second is the politics of identity replacing the politics of ideology. And this is not only a question of Trump or Urban or whoever. You can also see the rise of the Islamic State in the context of this. It is politics looking backwards. It is politics driven less by the hopes. The age of ideology was driven by hopes. The hope that by certain ideas, some of them deeply flawed, in my opinion, communism is a good example of that, but by the politics of ideology, you would create a much, much better world. And that the sacrifices of the present were worth doing because there was heaven, or whatever it was, that was going to arrive. Now politics everywhere is driven by the fear that the future is going to be problematic, and we have to go backwards to our identities, to our tribes, be that making America great again, or be that making Russia great again, or be that making Islam great again. But those are the dominant political trends, and they are less about building bridges and far more about building barriers between each other. The third obvious factor is the technological. We were discussing, some of us over lunch, and someone mentioned the fourth industrial revolution, and I said, as I normally do, that's a misunderstanding of the situation. It is not the fourth industrial revolution. It is the end of the industrial age and the beginning of the digital age. Well, it is as great a change as when mankind entered the agricultural age, X numbers of thousand years ago, in the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East. Whereas we enter the industrial age in Europe, as a matter of fact, latter part of the 18th century and beginning of the 19th century. And these particular developments, at the end of the, well, not at the end of the day, but eventually, of course, reshaped everything. The reshaping of industry is a small part of the transition to a digital age. And I sometimes compare it to, if you compare it to the Industrial Revolution, I think we are now at the stage where those that were discussing the impact of the second generation of the steam engine. The second generation of the steam engine was much more efficient than the first generation of the steam engine. It could do a lot of different things. Railroads, to take one example. But we now know that there were a number of things coming somewhat later that they hadn't a clue of, and the same applies to us. What does this mean? Well, the theme here is primarily geopolitics, so I'm going to speak primarily to that. The big geopolitical change of our age, which has been debated extensively here, is obviously the rise of China, or rather the return of China. Because China was a very dominant power in the, not quite global, because it wasn't global before. It was different empires and centers in different parts of the globe. It's rather late that the globe has come together. But for reasons that I'd not go into, China decided to move inwards, and Europe decided to move outwards, a shift that actually occurred late 14th century, if we go back to it. And that came to reshape the world, the decline of China, the rise of Europe, and the European offsprings. One of them is Russia, another one is obviously the United States. But now, the return of China, impressive. If you see the ambitions that were expressed by Xi Jinping at the 19th Party Congress, very impressive indeed. But we should be aware of the fact that there are question marks whether that will succeed. There are as economists will tell you, there are the financial question marks. There are limits to how much you can build up debt and invest in things that are clearly not productive enough. At some point in time, figures strike back, and it does have effects. And I would also argue that there are limits to the stability of an authoritarian system. They look very, very, very strong on the surface, but they tend to be very, very brittle in certain situations. So I would say that if I'm asked to give a prediction on where India is going to be 20 years down the line, I'm going to say there's a 20% sort of uncertainty in that prediction. A prediction on China, the degree of uncertainty is, due to these two factors, much bigger. With that reservation, China is forging ahead, and that has implications. Two aspects of that. One is military. We Europeans don't normally think about China in military terms because it's far away, it doesn't have any significant global military ambitions that we are aware of, and I think it's unlikely, although we saw the Chinese Navy exercising in the Baltic Sea this summer. Who had expected that only a couple of years ago? Today, the United States accounts for roughly 45% of all global military expenditure, with enormously impressive capabilities in a number of areas. I'm going to come to that. But on present trends, by 2030, 2035, Chinese military expenditure is going to be roughly US military expenditure. That's a fantastic shift. It's not going to translate into capabilities immediately. It takes time to build and train and develop doctrines. But it's going to have one effect that is highly significant for Europe. It will force the Americans to be even more obsessed by balancing China than they are today. We often hear the Americans saying that they account for, I forgot the figures, but 60% of NATO defense expenditure or 70% of whatever it is. That's of course not true today, even, because roughly 60% of US military expenditure is already devoted to Asia. And in future, I would say 80% of US military expenditure is going to be devoted to not securing things here, but as a matter of fact, balancing China. And it means also that anything that happens over there will have effects here. Already today, were there to be, which there could be, a conflict on the Korean Peninsula, the Americans need to reinforce the 8th Army and do it fairly fast. Their reinforcement plans for the 8th Army means that they have no margin whatsoever for helping us. No margins whatsoever for resources devoted to Europe. So what's going to happen there with the Chinese military expansion, with the American need to balance that, is going to have profound repercussions for the security of Europe, and we need to take that into account. The other aspect is, of course, the technological and what the Chinese are doing. And they are impressive. You can discuss whether they are as good as we are in terms of being innovative, in terms of being sort of having the scientific mind, having the openness in their society that makes innovation really possible. But the amount of resources they are throwing at it cannot be discounted. If you read their plan for developing in artificial intelligence that they published in July, where they say we're going to be the dominant in the artificial intelligence space by 2030, you have to take it seriously. I saw that only the city of Xinjiang, fairly big thing, fairly big city, but there are lots of those in China, decided to invest $15 billion in promoting artificial intelligence research there. And if we say that we are 10 times better than they are, or the Americans are saying that, well, if they devote 20 times as many resources as we do, they're going to be twice as good as we are anyhow. And if you look at patents in machine learning, I have a graph for that that is fairly revealing. First, nothing happens for a very long time. AI has been around for a long time. And then you see in the last 2, 3 years, you see the Americans going up like that. You see the Chinese going up even faster. And you see the Europeans being virtually nowhere. This is going to have an effect long term. And artificial intelligence is only part of the technological revolution, I would say. There are other things that are perhaps even more promising as well as scary. Warfare has been touched upon. And we are coming out of a period when we thought that we didn't need to think about wars, at least not big wars. We are now entering a period where we fear that we have to think about war again. And I would argue there are going to be two sorts of wars that you need to think about. The first is let's call it the fast and the furious. And the capabilities that we see being developed here are well beyond what we have in Europe. Nuclear is coming back, as would make the French happy, I guess. The nuclear posture review underway in the United States, and this is them spending $1.2 trillion in modernizing their nuclear triad. And re-evaluating the sort of entire doctrines of deterrence for a completely new age is necessary. It will be done. It will profoundly affect quite a lot. If you see what's happening in hypersonic weapons, it is also fairly scary. Hypersonic weapons is weapons that is sort of above, I mean, there's sort of cruise missiles that go above Mach 5, or there are different versions of them. The Russians are testing one at the moment that is Mach 8. There's no defense. You can forget about it. There's no defense. And some versions of that strike through space, a very long distance at an extremely high speed, and completely maneuverable and unpredictable. This is undeveloped in Russia, in China, in the United States. We are not there. But these are weapon systems that can strike extremely fast, extremely precise, and anywhere at any time. Air and space, I think, it was mentioned before in one of the panels there's going to be more an air component. I agree with that. But it's air space. There are today up there orbiting 12,000 satellites. There are 10,000 more satellites planned for the next 5 years. Russia has, US has, China has demonstrated anti-satellite capabilities. Our dependence upon space systems is phenomenal. The American, very secret, space plane, the US Air Force, the X-37, really an F-37, has amazing capabilities, and it's only the beginning. A lot of this fast and furious will happen in the air and the space arena. Add to that cyber. And we could talk about a lot about that. Yes, what worries me the most at the moment, and I'm really worried, is there's always a warfare shift between defensive and offensive. And in this particular case, the offensive clearly has the advantage in a way that we haven't seen, well, since the arrival of the tanks, I guess, that broke through the barbed wire and made sort of the blitzkrieg of Hitler possible after the stalemate of the First World War. Now we see the sexy thing around the world, if you listen to military, including European militaries. They're starting to discuss offensive capabilities in cyberspace and deterrence. Very, very dangerous stuff. Because there are two problems with these sort of offensive capabilities. First, proliferation risks, enormous. Nuclear weapons, big things, expensive, difficult to do. Not very many people can do it. It takes a long time. You detect it. And you can even, to some extent, try to control the proliferation of the technology. Cyber, forget about that. I think Rob One in the panel yesterday mentioned WannaCry. You know where WannaCry is coming from? WannaCry is a cyber weapon developed by the NSA in the US, or the basis for it. It was leaked or stolen. You can't keep these things under control. When the NSA can't control the cyber weapons they develop. And you know who deployed WannaCry? It was the North Koreans. So it was developed by the NSA, it was deployed by the North Koreans, and it nearly took out the national health system in the United Kingdom. And these weapons can proliferate, or they are proliferating. There are a number of them out there already, which you and I can pick up. We can reshape them, and we can deploy them. So proliferation risk enormous. Everyone will get them. Secondly, the escalation risks. Because you get one of these attacks, and you don't know where it's coming from, and you assume it's coming from there. And if everyone thinks that they can do deterrence by offensive capability, they start attacking each other without being entirely certain who it is. And then that person starts attacking another one, and certain of the most capable actors, you would never know them. I don't think we've ever seen any Israeli cyber operations. Does that mean that the Israelis aren't doing cyber operations? Of course they are, but they're hiding behind other nations. In the recent Gulf conflict, we have a situation where one of the actors, not going to name it, one of the actors hired actors in a completely different country to do an attack against the adversary. Whom do you attack against? Whom do you counterattack in that particular case? And since one of them was a fairly significant country, it would have gone haywire fairly fast. Add to that what was also alluded to earlier, automatic systems. I don't think automatic systems are going to come into use that much in terms of kinetic weapons, because I do think there are going to be some, but restrictions. But in the cyber domain, there are going to be automatic things. As soon as your systems detect an attack, it launches a counterattack. And then we are not talking minutes that we talk about nuclear warfare, we're talking milliseconds before it happens. And no command and control chains. This is really scary, what is going on in the world of offensive cyber capabilities. If we can limit that by some sort of international agreement remains to be seen. Which leads me, of course, into the digital revolution overall, which I think is, as said, profound and positive. The fact that I always quote, you can have all sorts of figures on everything, but within 5 years, 95% of the population of the world will be covered by mobile broadband networks with the capacity equal or better what we have in Europe today. 95% of the population of the world. Does that mean that everyone will be using it? No. But I would argue that a very high percentage of all young people in the world, it's not a geographical digital divide, it's a generational digital divide in all countries. They will be connected with devices that are extremely powerful. And this is just 4G. This is when the 5G revolution starts, with a capability increase that you can measure in different ways, but it starts with something that is a factor 100 better than we had, and which I mentioned for this 95%. What does this mean? We don't know. The only thing that we can be certain of is that it's going to be profoundly important in different respects. And the internet started as a communication device and it's become an infrastructure. It is now, of course, becoming the infrastructure of everything else. Everything is going to connect it to everything at lightning speed. The security of this space is the most important aspect of security that we have overall, and that needs to be factored in,
so
but also
Carl,
other factors. Yes. Secondly, the other aspect of war, just to mention that is still going to be with us, is what I call, in contrast to the fast and furious, that's going to be the slow and the frustrating. Peace operations, stability operations, state building, be that Africa or be that Middle East. It hasn't gone away, and we must be prepared for it. So then, where are we? Well, in a period of profound change. The 21st century is not the continuation of the 20th century. That's fairly obvious. The 20th century ended a couple of years ago. And I would argue that if we need an intellectual framework for the 21st century, I think the intellectual framework that is productive is more the 19th century, as a matter of fact, and what happened there. Because what happened in the 19th century, profound geopolitical change, shift in power balances that had effects, fairly long period of overall peace, but a lot of local and small wars, a lot of proxy wars, and then eventually, of course, the situation went entirely out of control. But maneuvering, proxy wars, geopolitical changes. Then a period of ideological turmoil. It wasn't identity politics, it was the birth of the politics of ideology, really during the 19th century, which transformed societies internally and their relationships with them. And then finally, of course, massive technological change, the Industrial Revolution. So that's where we are, the return to the 19th century, a time of profound change. Are we prepared for it? Unlikely. Do we need to get prepared? Yes.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Carl, for that great tour d'horizon of the global political scene today and tomorrow. A couple of questions before throwing it out to the audience. First on China. You spent quite a bit of time on assessing where we got to on China. We had yesterday a superb analysis by Parag Khanna on connectography and how the whole shift which is moving today towards Asia, and if you add up all the trade agreements that the EU has with Asia, it adds up to much and almost more than the US, and the 2030 perspective is huge. How worried should Europeans be about this idea of the Silk Road and the whole principle, where it seems as if we're giving quite a lot to the Chinese and perhaps more than we've realized?
I'm perhaps somewhat less worried about it. I mean, it's going to have sort of profound geopolitical implication in certain areas, but there are lots of things that are uncertain. The only part of it that I've been trying to look more into is the most concrete, and that is what they're doing in Pakistan. That's sort of 60 billion that is going, they say 60 billion. That is going, some of it, good stuff, power stations and things like that, clearly needed in Pakistan, to put it very mildly. Infrastructure, well, you can build a road over the Karakoram, good luck. There is one. It's been closed for a couple of years because of landslides. Build a highway there, yep, quite. Down to the port of Gwadar, which is already there. But is in the middle of Balochistan, which is a very difficult area. Add to that, the question is this loans? Loans by whom? To who? Is it grant money? Is it loans that are going to be non-performing that turns into Chinese equity? I think there are a lot of problems, and you have to look at it individual cases and see what we mean. I'm much more worried about what the Chinese ambitions in cyberspace than I'm worried about their ambitions in physical space.
Well, that's my second question about the technological advance. It surprised me the other day to know the biggest producer in the world of robots happens to be China. Although you would have thought they had enough people to be able to do a whole lot of things. They seem, and you would be closer to it than I think that most of us, because you have your Swedish-China-US link, I think I understand, is how much do you think that they're really capable technologically to be able to have these huge advantages in artificial intelligence, when you're quite right, in IBM and other companies in the last 12 months there's been a huge kind of shift forwards. Why is it that Europe is lagging behind so much when we've after all got a digital single market and the whole emphasis on digitalization, and yet we don't seem to be making the same kind of inroads?
No, we are not. I mean, that's fairly obvious. I mean, the Chinese have been impressive, partly by sort of dedicating sort of political willpower. We need to do this, and partly by allocating resources, which they do. And even if they waste a lot of resources, as I mentioned, I mean, there's a quantity factor that to some extent compensates for the quality factor. And they have been doing things. I mean, look at sort of the area where Europe has been, we say that the Americans are leading in everything. That is not true. In sort of telecommunications, mobile systems, that's European. That's the Ericsson, it used to be the Alcatels, the Nokias, and whatever. Americans out of that particular picture. Our competitors are the Chinese. The Chinese were nowhere 15 years ago. Now we have two firms that are the number 2 and the 3 in the world, that are very much facilitated by the fact that they have access to cheap credits from the Chinese government, and also other sort of government links that sort of facilitates their possibility to operate. And the true dedication, as I see what they do on the artificial intelligence, is impressive. And they can also draw on intellectual power, as can others, Indians, if they want to go to Silicon Valley and look at the nationality of the people that are having the key positions there.
Well, that's something which I think we'll keep on looking at in the months ahead in ESPAS, but thank you for those two comments. I'd like to open it out now to you all in the audience. Please, could you let us know who you are when you ask a question? Preferably make a question rather than a comment, and I'll take as many questions as we can within a 4-minute period. Then that gives you a chance to reply to all of that in the remaining 5 minutes. So who would like to be the first? Yes, please.
Kurtube from the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy. You compare the 21st century with the 19th century, which started with a revolution and ended with a world war. I mean, if you take that through, I mean, what would you say to, I mean, at least Europe at this moment, which are the 3 decisions they need to make right now in order to be prepared for this next 19th century?
Well, that's an easy one. Thank you. Next question, please. At the back, please.
Thank you. My name is Jakob Warburg from Danish Foreign Ministry. China has for a long time been catching up and imitating Western technology, especially in computing, etc. What do you believe, what can they do on their own? They're very close to the frontier of innovation. Will they be sufficiently innovative to compete with the West in this area?
Thank you very much. Third one at the back, please.
Frank de Bier, working with Klaus Weller, our secretary here. Do you think we have a security vacuum that is growing, as many speakers had it today? And do you think that if it's growing, we have a specific application to the space of the Baltic? And if this is true, if we have a security vacuum in the Baltic, what should be the steps Europe and the allies should take to prevent it?
Thank you very much, Frank. Question there and then one at the back. I think that may be the last 2 we can take.
This is Ramona Gaber from the YTN network. Everybody seems to be speaking about China nowadays, but are there any emerging actors that we don't see or we don't think about because we are too busy thinking about China? Which are the next China, let's say, that you think we should consider now so that we are prepared in the future?
Right, at the back, please.
Hi, my name is Prayesh Chaudhary. So I am from Pakistan. I'm closely following the economic development which is happening vis-a-vis Chinese loan or investment, as you may call it. But I'd really like to learn more about why are you looking at it through the lens of it being loan and not an investment, as it is a long-term project. It is not something that it's going to end within the next 2-3 years.
Well, thank you very much. I think you let us know yesterday there was some doubt about that Chinese investment in Pakistan, if I remember, but that's another point. Right, Carl, over to you if you'd like to be able to summarize and answer those, and anything else you'd like to add to your comments. Well,
those, why am I interested in that? It's just that I find it intriguing. I mean, the complete lack of transparency, certain of these things, leads me to question, what is it really? And the sort of the long-term stability, financial and political sustainability of it is got to be slightly dependent upon answers to those particular questions. And I would guess the same. I've seen I have another example that I would go into the railroad through Laos, through Bangkok, where when you start to look at the details, you become, what is it really and what's going to happen with it? But it's got to be transformative if it works in Pakistan. But there are also huge both political and other ramifications to it. But as said, I think we should look at these sort of project by project and see what it could. And some of it is good. I said, but building power stations in Pakistan, absolutely, a necessity. And if the Chinese do it, fine. Is there security vacuum in the Baltics, popular thing? No, not at the moment. Anyhow, which leads me to sort of, I wrote a thing a long time ago which was called the Baltic litmus test, which was essentially saying that the long-term ambitions of Russia, we see them in their relationship to the Baltic area. That's historically been the case. If you're from Turkey, you will probably add Constantinople to the picture, but otherwise it's been a lot of the Baltics. And if you look at it in that historical terms, I would argue that the historical lesson, which I think applies, is that Russia is capable to advance in the direction of the West, generally speaking, be that the Baltics, when the West is, whatever the West is disunited. There is no historical example of the Russians taking on everyone else at the same time. They don't do it. They do it when they can line up with someone else. 1807, Tilsit, in Napoleon, had profound effects. 1939, with Hitler, had profound effects. Now you can go further back in history, but the conclusion of that is, as long as the EU and NATO stands united, I think the room for Russia to be opportunistic or whatever is distinctly limited. Because they know that in such a situation, they are likely to win the first engagement. They're almost certain to win the first engagement, but they are equally certain to lose the last one. And wars are decided not by the first battle, but by the last battle. And then you look at what widely is considered the correlation of forces big time. So as long as we stay together and have the things in place there, I wouldn't be overly concerned. There could be other security vacuums that we need to be aware of. China capabilities, are there other actors as well that could develop? Yes, there are other actors. As I said, with the cyber and some of these fast and furious technologies, we don't even have them in Europe. We are not near them in Europe. It's only 3 countries that have them. But some of the other things, as I said, on the cyber, as I indicated, the proliferation. I mean, the North Koreans are creating havoc. North Korea is not a powerful country. It's a poor country. It doesn't provide electricity to its people. Can hardly feed them. But it's robbing banks all over the world, as we know. It is stealing cyber weapons. It took out Sony Pictures, if you care about that. Some people do, particularly Sony Pictures. And if they can do that, there are other things they can do. So we need to we need to widen the spectrum of people that we look at, because they can suddenly threaten us. We're all neighbors in the digital world, in a way that wasn't the case before. That works positively as well. I mean, small dedicated countries can be very powerful. I sometimes say there are two countries in the world that I think take cyber seriously in terms of shaping its policies. They are the two cyber powers of the world. One is obviously China, the other is Estonia. You might be aware of the fact that there's a size difference between them. But in terms of sort of intellectual awareness of these issues, they're roughly on the same level, which is worth noting. So it is possible for small actors. Then there was something up there that I don't know. What was it more? Yes, the three decisions that we should take. Yeah, that's a good question. What would those be? Well, it was alluded to that I spoke yesterday in another context that sort of 10, 15 years ago, the entire emphasis of our policies was that we were projecting towards the outside world. We were projecting order. Now we have shifted around. We are protecting order to the neighborhood, or projecting. We were now shifted, so we are protecting us from the disorders of the neighborhood. So we've gone from offensive to defensive, you can say, in the entire approach to building up European politics. I think that's good, but I would say we should not sort of forget the project, because the project part of our policies is still long-term very powerful. Short-term, debatable, but long-term very powerful. And that should not be given up, either in the sort of regional or in the global context. Then we must build up capabilities, and we must, if possible, although that's going to be difficult, develop more of an agility when it comes to maneuvering in the different, be that political or economic or other battle spaces that are going to be there. The Russians, to go to them, they're not particularly powerful when it comes to capabilities, but they have an agility to act. They could, in a couple of years like that, decide we do Crimea. And they did Crimea in a couple of days. They could very quickly we do Syria. And they insert forces there. Not much in terms of forces. I mean, we have far more forces than they did, either Crimea or Cyprus, but they have the agility to act. And the agility to act is often the key to at least short-term success. That we need to think about.
Listen, we're at 3:09, so I think we're about time to come to a halt. But in this very short period of time, Carl, I mean, we've known each other a long time, so I tell you the truth. Thank you very much for being with us. Your presence made a real difference to our conference in the ideas and everything else that you gave it. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure.